Welcome back. I am your MC. I am Perry Chan. This is a co-organized summit from the Hong Kong China Gas Company and the Towngas Smart Energy. And we are very happy today to have invited a number of speakers to speak to us, one of which is coming onto the stage now. And we are very happy to have Chairman of the Council for Sustainable Development, Dr. the Honorable Lam Ching Choi. Now, I think in the future you should just address me as Peter so that I appear younger. That was a long title you read out just now. Everyone, this morning and in the 3 to 4 hours this morning, we have shared a lot of things. And next, in the afternoon session, in fact, this is an ad hoc session. ISAC allowed me some time in the afternoon session here to share with you some of my thoughts and feelings. Now, this morning, after hearing you speak, I have some feelings and some thoughts to share. For ESG, in the afternoon, we're focusing on S&G. This morning was on E. And I feel that there are 2 points which are very important. First of all, I feel that you are really coming from the heart. And so that was E. And for S&G in the afternoon, you ought to be sharing from the heart as well, because it is impossible not to come from the heart for this kind of work for any corporation and individual. You cannot be ESG alone, and you need a team. And with a team, you will have a chance of being successful. And whatever the size of your corporation, you need to join hands before you become a force. And here I would like to share with you a story. Perhaps you have already heard of the story, and that is a professor at a university. He had 100 students, and they were all gathered together like you are here now, and everyone was given a balloon, and they were of the same color, the balloon, and the names were written on the balloons, and they were to release the balloon. Balloons were flying everywhere, and they were given 5 minutes, the students, to look for their own balloon. And they couldn't do that. After 5 minutes, everybody was still looking for their own balloons. And the professor said that this actually is a strategy, whether individual, corporate, and a team. You have to think about this, and that is, when you have caught a balloon, most likely this balloon is not yours, but there is a name on it, right? And this is a class of students, and when you see the name, you should right away call out, hey, this is Dr. Lam's, this is Peter Wong's balloon. Then everybody would know, and very quickly you'll be able to find your own balloon. So in this story, it tells of a few things. First of all, you need a strategy to go about whatever you want to do. And secondly, sharing. If you just look for your own happiness, you'll never get it. But on the other hand, if you share your happiness with others, we all get to be happy. So in this afternoon session, it is S&G, social and governance. For governance, it's more about the company itself, but how you go about the work, you can share with us so that you can hear what other corporations are doing. And within my corporation, how do I go about this work? Now, this morning was very successful. Credit rating, of course, will be all yours, but just now somebody said that you have forgotten the SMEs. The sharing just now was that we have had a good beginning, and a lot of people would be able to pitch in. They'll be willing to pitch in when you have a good start. So, yes, thank you. That was Mr. Wong just now. That was an ad hoc sharing. Would you please be seated, Mr. Peter Wong? Now, for ESG development, we need E, S, and G. If we only consider one factor without an overall consideration, it will not be as effective. And therefore, yes, let us invite the next speaker, Chairman of the Council for Sustainable Development, Mr. or Dr. Dion Lam Ching Choi. He is a member of the Legislative Council, and he had putting his efforts into sustainable development, in particular in the area of social entrepreneurship and social innovation.
好多謝大家，咁啊，可能
Thank you, everyone. Perhaps you have all forgotten about this. According to the law and the regulation, we can be on the stage and without a mask. So we now are walking towards the path to normal, and so we can be very targeted and precise about our pandemic efforts. So we can take off the photos and take off the masks and take photos. So every time, and Peter will tell a story. So I really like to thank Peter for inviting me here today. And even if Peter does not invite me, every time when Towngas invites me, I would be here. We have also seen that some of my past experience, and the reason is very simple. Because for Towngas in ESG, you really have done a great work. A lot of the companies, perhaps they will focus on different things. However, for Hong Kong CG, you have done great in all areas. And together with the role that I play, I really high value Hong Kong CG. And in addition, I am the chairman of the Council for Sustainable Development, so I have to be here today. I cannot miss this event. And in addition, in our policy address, we have also heard from the chief exec, and carbon neutral will also become part of our strategy. And when we talk about environment, I have to be here. As you know about my social background, which I will share later on. In addition, I will talk about social capital, and in addition for G governance. So you know that I have been working in the government. So therefore, when we talk about ESG, and I have no choice, and I cannot miss this event. In addition, my colleagues are very capable. They have helped to arrange these meetings for me. And when we talk about ESG, I am also very delighted to be here to share with you on this very important topic. So I believe that you all have enjoyed your lunch and great wine as well. So if I talk slowly, if I do not follow the PowerPoint, perhaps it may not be that great. And I myself, I'm also starting from a new chapter. And I hope that when we talk about these topics without anything new, if simply talking about something that's, without starting from new and not talking about anything new, then it's nothing special. And when we talk about social enterprise, so with the ESG's development, of course, in social enterprise, we have a lot of development. For instance, for the government, and the government provides various support. Of course, private enterprise, private companies do not need subsidies from the government. How does the government provide an environment for social enterprises to develop? I think that's equally important. I believe that you all know that with the social enterprise, the government has provided various help, for instance, financial aid and awareness of social enterprise, collaboration. The government has provided various platforms and funds for support. I myself, as someone who is also promoting social enterprise, to be honest, today we only have about 700 to 800 of social enterprises registered. But again, that's a good progress. I believe you all know this. However, compared with Hong Kong's private companies and enterprises, and it really is a very small proportion. So the next step, the biggest challenge that we face is how to make sure that the concept of social enterprise can be applied into private companies, which is also why earlier when Towngas invited me, I have said that I have to be here because Towngas is quite advanced in this area compared with others. I also hope that for Hong Kong CG, you can continue to play a very active role. And during lunch, I have also mentioned a few companies. I'm not going to name them publicly here, so we will not forget about SMEs. So Peter, you do not need to worry about this. We will also focus on the promotion of SMEs. In Hong Kong, at the moment, we have various different types of big, medium, and small enterprises. If the government can form a platform to push for the development of social enterprises, have a platform, same as what we have today, to exchange information, to discuss about experience, or even that the government could have some money set aside for support. I know that for large-scale companies, for instance, for some companies, they do not need a lot of support, but for SMEs, if the government could give them some incentives, some support, and to move towards a social enterprise, that would be great. This morning, we talked about ESG, and actually, this is a very clear direction. In addition, for our Earth Mother, not that this is something is necessary to do. It's something that we must do, because if we do not do this work, then it's leaving us with no future. And of course, when we talk about carbon neutral, and we need to look at social capital. And from both sides, the government has a responsibility to push this forward. Perhaps in ESG, people don't often try and understand in terms of the private companies that I get in touch with. And environment is something that we all understand. Governance as well, if you are a listed company, and therefore the relevant requirements are always there for governance. For us, however, for social, people do not have a lot of understanding. For instance, in the past, we talked about CSR and working on charitable causes. And so what does this really include? Previously, I have also met some ESG consultants. Generally speaking, people did not really focus on social capital. So I'd like to say a few more words here. What is social capital? It's something that's that is intangible. The World Bank has said that we have 4 kinds of capitals, and you can understand financial capital, whether you have money, that's easy to understand. For the society, what is economic development? This is easy to understand. We have a human capital, so that's also easy to understand, understood by everyone. For instance, in Hong Kong, we are fighting for talents. Not only that, we're fighting for talents, but also fighting for human capital. And thirdly is the cultural capital. So when we go to lunch, and you can see that culture is a very important part of our culture. And the fourth one is social capital. World Bank has said that they spend a lot of time on this. If you're interested, you can go to their website and read about this. They spend a lot of energy talking about social capital. Why? For the World Bank, they believe that this is not often talked about, but very important. Actually, in this, there are many different dimensions. If we have ESG consultants, and you could work with us and to, for instance, further promote this concept. For social capital, for the past few years, we have all experienced this, and perhaps you will understand about this. Generally speaking, we can talk and chat to each other with our friends, and this is very important. A lot of the things, if we cannot achieve, this will affect our business environment. So recently, I was speaking to my colleagues, and I have quite a few Zoom meetings every day. I sometimes forget what I have spoken, what I have heard on Zoom. The feeling is different. I'm sitting here, I can see Peter, I can hear the stories being told by Peter. This would leave me with a great impression. But if Peter was talking about the story, but I'm sitting on the other side and replying to emails, so I would miss his story. So when you see someone over the internet versus meeting someone in person, it's greatly different. And when we further expand this relationship for different groups, different companies, and if we further expand this, compared with your company's scope and, for instance, different targets, different direction, different culture, or for different groups to be extreme. For instance, with people who are protesting outside of your company, etc., in terms of your relationships with them. Actually, these are equally important in society, and the World Bank has said it very well. Actually, here it would include a lot of elements, and the first one, we have the flow of information, for instance, information and internet. In addition, what we often emphasize on is trust. Do we have a trusting relationship that we can tolerate each other? We can endure certain things. For instance, it's not about going to different cities, going to different countries, how many similar institutions there are. What's more important is that for these institutions, what is their relationship? In addition, for their connectivity, and it's more important than those bricks, and the cement in between the bricks are actually more important. I remember when I was in my previous roles, I have met a lot of different groups and a lot of protesters, actually. They were out there criticizing me. Actually, everybody could actually sit down and have a chat. And I think that this is very important for society, and this is social capital. In Hong Kong is a very special place. We know that sometimes people would complain about the government. This is completely understandable. Hong Kong government has also done a lot of work, and a lot of the work Hong Kong government has done is actually quite advanced. For instance, I have been the community investment and shared fund chairman, and we also have the current chairman here, sitting here with us today in Hong Kong. If we look around the world, Hong Kong is the only place that the government has taken money out of its own pocket to establish the fund and to push forward for social capital. Because a lot of the governments, they are quite cheap, and they would say that I have launched a lot of things and you are protesting outside of my office, then I will no longer provide any funding. But Hong Kong government is not like this, and Hong Kong has been returned to China for over 20 years, and the government has actually spent a lot of money to push forward for social capital development. So this is something that is really well reflecting the government's willingness to invest in social capital. We have a lot of collaboration platforms, and I'm not going to go into details. But if we look at this for social capital, and if we are friends, I will help you. If we are not friends, or if we are enemies, and I will still be linked with you. So this is social capital, and this is something that in the past we have been in touch with a lot of institutions and groups, and a lot of them are not traditional groups.
社會每一個
So it includes every sector, every fabric of society, all related. So it's not the traditional NGO's operation, but rather they are very non-traditional small organizations or private sector companies which are joining in as well. And of course, social enterprise funds as well. Definitely it promotes innovation. So because of time, I'm not going to be able to go into the details of that, but it definitely has more to do with technology and innovation, and including the technology fund that actually over lunch we've been talking about that as well. And that is, how do we build up the entire ecosystem in Hong Kong? The universities are great. I mean, their basic research is good, but their technology transfer may not be good. And a lot of young people want to do startups, but their value at depth is very steep. Stephen knows as well. In the first and second reports, it's the social enterprise funds that had funded them. So how do we build up this ecosystem? And after that, how do we commercialize and customize the products, do testing? All these can be done on this platform. But I want to spend more time on the following, which you may not have turned your attention to. The CRS, the fund that I've talked about, I was chair for 3 years, and we have engaged Hong Kong Quality Assurance using social capital to integrate into S, social. They want to do ESR, a company, so they have to go into S, social. How do we do something that is sustainable and durable to build relationship rather than to just burn money? We have seen a lot. Towngas has already used a lot of the concepts just now. Yes, I think I was with Towngas one time, planting trees, planting forests. Everybody's doing planting trees and forests. But in that, how do we build the social capital? If you think about it a little more, you'll be able to achieve it. So this report, this guiding set of principles, is to help the organizations, in particular the companies, when doing ESG, how they can build social capital. And there are some local company examples, 5 companies. Unfortunately, we did not include Towngas. We should have included Towngas to provide their actual experience, how they were able to build S, social development through social capital building. It's not difficult, actually. Now, I have very little time left, and as a sustainable development fund, I will have to talk about it as well. Yes, and we're actually talking about an integrative relationship. ESG are all integrated, E and S and G. Environment, for example. How can we at the same time have some social capital? Governance, how we at the same time achieve and promote social capital. Actually, social capital is about glue. That is to say, the different concepts are glued together, the different values are glued together, different institutions are glued together, different people are glued together. Social capital is actually the glue, the cement among E and S and G. So I hope in the future, when you do ESG work, you think about social capital formation. Once you've glued up, and I hope you do, we do, that is, when I retire, when Peter Wong retires, we'll still be friends, and I'll still be listening to Peter's stories. And that is a concept. It's not like we're business, and after a transaction, we're done with each other. No. So that is the thinking. That is the point about glue. All right. Lastly, with a little bit of time, I'm going to talk about sustainable development. The Council for Sustainable Development, of which I'm chairman, the work of the council, I'm sure you know already. And for social capital as a concept, as I've mentioned just now, we want to build it into the work of the council. And we do not want there to be top-down policies from the government. For instance, recently, we had a public engagement paper concerning disposable or one-time disposable plastics. If the government wants, they can definitely come down like a ton of bricks and make it hard and heavy for all of us. And we more or less feel that the people of Hong Kong are supportive of reduction of plastics. So all we have to do is to come up with a revised law and go to the electoral. But the government even doesn't want to do that. So for the council, there is one responsibility, and that is we'll find a consultant to do the public engagement. And so we're using social capital concept. You know, when we talk about plastics, there are lots of stakeholders: hotel industry, F&B industry, supermarkets, in the people of Hong Kong. 50 cents is fine, and now you want to levy, what, $1 for plastic bags? Everybody is a stakeholder. Sometimes they will have different views as well, these stakeholders. So we use focus groups, and we have town halls to, as much as possible, engage the stakeholders. My only experience is that it really works. At the end of the day, am I able to persuade each and every one that it's going to be $1 for plastic bags? You know, just to give you an obvious example. And can I convince each lady, a woman in the future, the cotton bud will not be made of plastic, you know, and you will not be able to get your plastic cotton buds. So it makes the cotton buds a little bit more expensive using wood or using paper. But can I convince each and every woman who wears makeup to use those cotton buds? Not necessarily, but in the process, we'll be talking, we'll be forming relationship, and when the government does put it into policy, it'll be much smoother. So that's exactly what my council wants to do, and of course we have a fund to support all that work. I'm not going to go into the workings of the fund, though, given the limited time here. So ESG is done not because we have to have an annual report. It's not about being a listed company and therefore it's obligatory for us. No. But ESG is really for this earth, for the human race, for our sustainable future development. So what I talked about just now in SDG, in fact, it has to do with a number of areas. And I hope that you will be together with me, together with Towngas, in this path of efforts. And we want Towngas to continue to play the leadership role for us so that ESG can be popularized. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lam. Please be seated. Now, for an enterprise to make profits for the shareholders is important, but at the same time, if they also can consider the needs of the society and to bring on a new business model to meet the needs of different stakeholders and to achieve sustainable development would be good. So on this topic, we're very happy to have invited social welfare representatives, the academia, and from the business sector to talk about creating shared value to sustain Hong Kong's competitiveness. The speakers for this session are Dr. the Honourable Stephen Wong from the Legislative Council, Head of Social Innovation, Office of Research and Knowledge Transfer Services, the CUHK, Dr. Elsie Tsui, Founder and CEO of Social Ventures Hong Kong and co-founder of Green Monday, Mr. Francis Ngai, and Chairman of the Agency for Volunteer Service, Ms. Melissa Kai Pang. And we're very happy to have invited as moderator the Executive Director of the Hong Kong Management Association to be the moderator for us, Mr. Young. All right. Would you please take a group photo? So, without further ado, our moderator, Mr. Young, please. Good afternoon, everyone. Our heavyweight speakers, very happy to have this opportunity to sit down with you at this summit, which is co-organized by the Hong Kong MA and the Hong Kong and China Gas Company, at this session to discuss creating shared value to sustain Hong Kong's competitiveness. A question for our speakers. ESG. S is about social, and Michael Potter says ESG is for commonly shared value creation. And at the Hong Kong MA, we are also promoting business with purpose to promote stronger social innovation and social development for the companies. Now, some say there is already CSR, so why go any further than that? Now, given the COVID situation, is it not the time to extend on this work? How do you see that? Ladies first, perhaps? How about Ms. Pang? Well, thank you, Isaac. Thank you for this opportunity for me to share. Now, CSR and CSV, I think my view is slightly different from yours in terms of angle, because when we do any analysis, we approach it from our familiar point of view. Corporate social responsibility, CSR, what is our responsibility, right? It is a responsibility. It's not a right. It's a responsibility, mind you. And perhaps you wouldn't think that I'd be saying that. But if you know of my background, it would only be natural because I'm a lawyer and we talk about the basic law. The basic law talks about responsibilities and rights. Now, it's a responsibility. It's your responsibility to do something. Now, I'm a lawyer, and every day in Hong Kong, we're talking about having to comply with the law, be law-abiding. Being law-abiding is a responsibility. According to the basic law, it says so as well. But if you look at responsibility, it is something really basic. I have the responsibility. I discharge that responsibility, that duty. That's it. That's all to it. If you look at Michael Potter, his analysis is that if you have a responsibility to do some social good, you have to make some investment, you have to be a volunteer, etc. Then for the corporate, there is a dichotomy. On the one hand, you're profit-making. On the other hand, you're a giving sector. And the most classic example of CSR would be fair trade. But for fair trade, some people think that this is paying a higher than market price to buy something so that the farmers would have a better income. But this is scalable. If you look at it from this angle, it becomes problematic. Because if CSR is about giving, then there is always a limit. You can give. What you can give will always be limited to what you have in the pocket. There will have to be a ceiling, a limit. But on the other hand, if you change the paradigm, Harvard, Michael Porter says so. If you use CSV, go back to a very fundamental basic level, a corporate is profit-making. And if you have created a social value, it is good for you, yourself as well. I go back to the basic law. And taking it from a law's point of view, if you talk about measures and methods, and if everybody's law-abiding, that is good, isn't it? It would be good.
However, when we talk about morality and for instance, we have a good citizen, and I myself was also the chairman for the citizenship education. You need to be responsible, you need to be caring, but the law does not have this responsibility saying that you have to care for others. So this is at a high level. From this perspective, if we look at it, this is a basic responsibility. And in addition, if you want to elevate it to CSV and to create common sharing values, and for instance, from the company's perspective, it is creating more value. So I would look at it from this way. Great. We have heard about it from a legal perspective, and thank you, Ms. Peng, to help us to understand more about the law. And Francis, you are an expert in this area as well. Can you please share with us more of your views? Yes, we often talk about benefits and targets. Actually, both of these two can be combined together. And if that was the case 15 years ago, I would have not needed to quit the business community and taken another route. And so in those days, basically the mainstream would be doing their work and pay tax, and that's it. But I can say for certain that all these businesses, especially for startups, starting from startups, they need to have a vision. For instance, not only that they want to build a good building or provide a good service. However, when time passes on, people forget about their initial intention. And so this time we talk about business with a mission. So 2 to 3 years ago, and we had launched some of the roundtables and the ones that you can do yourself. Yes, you go ahead, and others, I think that you look to your peers. It's not necessarily about competition. For instance, in terms of carbon emission, this is something that we can collaborate when we look for our mission, when we look for what we set out to do, and everybody's distance is different. And so when we talk about the CSV these days, actually doing good things, there will be benefits. For instance, today we don't need to sacrifice to work in social enterprise. And in addition, for different stakeholders, for instance, consumers, our employees, if they are saying that what you are doing does not have a mission, then they are not going to work for you. For investors, it is the same, and for suppliers as well. So when you have a mission, you will receive help. And I think that we should spend more energy to try to understand about social mission. And when we provide choices to people, when we provide more products, and when we have a very strong mission. And I believe that for anything that is beneficial for the business, that will follow. Later on, if I have time, I will also talk about some specific examples of social enterprises. Okay, great. Thank you, Francis. We also want to hear from the media, and Dr. Sui, you have done a lot of work and research in this area. Do you have anything to share? Yes, we have heard a lot of great examples and shared our views. And for CSR, I myself personally, before doing my PhD, I was in the area of CSR, and later on when we went back to look at CSR, it's about doing good. And later on, there was a center, and this center is about after you have made money and then go and do good. And what is constraining is that it's a bit different, or there's a bit of a distance between this and the business community. But CSV has been able to bring those two together. And I'd like to share an example with you here. Some people might think that if I am working in this area, it might be difficult. I need to look at the supply chain. And for instance, will this make it more difficult for us to make money? But if you really want to do well in CSV, this is a great example, and to lead to better development of your business. And I have an example here for you. So, for instance, chocolate, and I myself, every day, I would like to eat a piece of chocolate. I don't know if anybody else has this habit. You know that for chocolate, it comes from cocoa beans. And for instance, if we say that a certain chocolate brand is very expensive, but for some of the cocoa bean peasants, they don't really make a lot of money, and a lot of the child labor, this is another social issue that we face. In addition, for large producers, they would really need to have a stable processing process to make sure that their raw material can be processed, and they would then have a CSV activity, so which is for the cocoa producers, and this is for cocoa producers' families who are based in Indonesia, and providing training to them, for instance, teaching them how to better produce cocoa to improve their productivity. In the meantime, they would also look for some people, for instance, to provide micro loans and ask and help them to buy certain equipment. In the meantime, there will also be a long-term contract with them. And for instance, you do not need to go through an agent or middleman and just to sell your cocoa beans to the company directly. So they could receive more benefits. And in the meantime, for the producers of cocoa beans, they can also avoid the different types of exploitation, because with the changes of weather, sometimes they also get exploited. So this is what we can see for CSV, and can bring long-term benefits. Great, thanks. This is another great example. I need to go back and learn about this and see what are the experience that I can learn from this. Okay. So Dr. Wang, what are your sharings? So I can share with you from personal experience. You know that I was originally an investment banker. So Francis earlier talked about whether I have left the business community. Actually, no. And my personal feeling is this, for instance, more than 10 years ago, at that time, different industries were working on social innovation. And the situation back then was that if you want to make changes within the system, that was a few years ago, I was trying to drive forward, for instance, microfinancing and in the mainstream finance. So this was what I was trying to push for. For instance, back then to push for ESG was difficult because not a lot of people were willing to make such changes, and there were pioneers from the outside who were trying to leading this. And the changes that I was trying to make, and I firmly believe that in a place in Hong Kong, if we see social issues, if the business community do not participate, this issue cannot be resolved, whether it is from human capital or in terms of the resources being put into it, and we will not see any results. And in addition, for business community, sometimes it's even more powerful than the government. The collaboration between the government and the community and the people, we need to combine together. Otherwise, we are not able to make any difference. So my third point is that for me personally, when I was looking at this R, and so we talked about R, and now moving on to V. So V represents value. What is value? And we often hear that a lot of entrepreneurs from overseas, one of them would be Bezos or Elon Musk, and you know that creating a business, I don't know whether you believe this, they say that they create a business not to make money, but to do something that they really care about, and this is their vision. So in terms of value, and this is through the business community. For instance, only when we work together and when we have a commonly shared value, you want to have a business that can resolve problems, and money is a byproduct. Once you resolve the problem, then you will be able to make money, same as Elon Musk. He solved the problem and he made a lot of money. Of course, if you are working backwards, then it doesn't work. It's really about the value of the problem that you're trying to solve. And a lot of people would say that for our life, it's not simply about breathing. For a company, it's not about making money. For our life, we need it to be meaningful. So it is the same for a company. Therefore, this is really the truth. From this perspective, for CSR and CSV, the biggest difference would be V. So this is about the responsibility and the values. Okay, great. That is really exactly what I'm thinking. I don't really need to look at the script given to me. We can continue our discussion. So you talked about Elon Musk, and he has resolved a social issue, and the money has followed. This is correct. So we have also heard that, for instance, Peter earlier talked about working together with our customers, providing them with the safety, and then customers would follow. So again, for instance, and we want to resolve issues of different, such as traffic jam, and this is their original intention, and they wanted to solve that problem. So in the face of the pandemic, we would often think about this as well. For instance, there are some SMEs, it's difficult for them to survive, and then talking to them about environment, etc. And we have also heard that we really need to get the business community involved. So how do we do this? Perhaps the question goes to Stephen. For SMEs, we all face the economic pressure. So how do we look at this issue? Or in other words, how do we encourage them, for instance, to encourage them about what to do? I think that Francis perhaps has more authority, but perhaps I'll say a few words first. And this is not talking about high-level stuff. And we have realized that CSV or ESG that we talk about today is actually quite similar to what we talk about 100 years ago. And we talk about these gentle businessmen. And this is to say that, for instance, for your employees, for your suppliers, and for your customers, and you talk about them as a family. It's very difficult these days, but in terms of this idea, this concept is quite a Confucius one, and we talk about it in China. And for instance, for this chocolate brand, and in the UK during the Victorian period, and there were some capitalist companies and versus the capitalism today. And we see that right now we are in an extreme capitalism society. To put it simply, for instance, I worked in a company before in Chicago, and this company was saying that their purpose is to make money. But 100 years ago, they were not saying this. So I think that we have simply, for instance, in the past, we were in an extreme capital market, and when this market makes certain corrections, and this is a correction of the concept, and the concept is that not only about making money or CSR or CSV or having values, having responsibilities, but of course, this is more of a macro issue in Hong Kong. From SMEs, we can see that it's very tough for them. This is something that we cannot change. It is exactly because of these extreme capitalism, because of these operations system, and the SMEs are in a tough position. I really agree that for instance, giving them more pressure and asking them to fill out more forms and more admin. You want to help them grow. You want to give them more room to help them blossom. And we want to see 100 flowers blossom to give more opportunities. What about you, Francis? So just now, Stephen also talked about this.
I heard that there are 3,000 people who have signed up today online. That's great. Let's think about different stakeholders as our cooperative partners. The consumers, for example, they would have certain objectives as well. So do we partner up with our stakeholders, our employees? For example, do we co-create something? As corporations, you want to develop ES, and apart from thinking of ways and means yourself, perhaps you should go out and meet with some NGOs. Green Monday, for instance, we've had a lot of cooperation with different sectors, F&B, obviously, and we have concept stores as exemplars, and also, let me not name names, even the fast food operations, chains, we work with them. Well, in the past, for fancy restaurants, they serve certain foods. I mean, vegetarian, for example, green food. But today, they are also working with us, Green Monday, and they have more vegans, vegetarians going to them to become their patrons. So, in the future, will there be something new sparking out of that relationship with the NGOs and the corporates? So in the future, social enterprises and innovation, can they not work together in the future? In the past 10 years or so, for social enterprises, they have already played a very important function in resolving social problems and issues. And this is exactly a place where you can test the water to see your relevance of your business with world or social issues. Now, even friends from Chicago School of Economics are saying that, well, it's a sign of the times, right? 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, he was one of the early investors in us. As Dr. Wang said, whether it is social enterprise social, it's blurred, actually, the distinction. Now, the friends that we see in them, the people are the same people. Well, definitely Towngas and HAMA, they've won a lot of major awards. So they're very willing to do a lot of things, and perhaps for investments, because of compliance regulations, there is some work to be done. But on the other hand, I do see hearts, second generations of major families, for example, they're very willing to do something for our society. Let's all press refresh. Let's all press refresh, which is purpose. The word is purpose. Let's think about what we want to achieve, what our corporations want to achieve, and what our next generation, our children, what kind of a world do you want it to be for them? So let's all press refresh. Francis, we're talking about cross-sectorial cooperation here. That's very wide. Now, I want to ask from you, Professor Choi, do you have other case studies? Do you have any other experience or insight that you would want to share? Well, I can't say sharing any insight, but I can definitely share some case studies. For CSV, it is a very good opportunity for any corporation, including SMEs. Just now, the two speakers said it is very important that we have the heart. There's a lot of research showing that the young consumers of today, they feel that they very much want to patronize a company which has certain missions, values, and responsibilities. And if indeed we can have value creation in our strategy and develop it, then I think it will be positive for your corporation's business. An example to share with you, Coca-Cola in the Philippines. I'm sure you all know about Coca-Cola. Actually, you have all had Coca-Cola. I've worked at Coca-Cola before, so I'm familiar with them. In the Philippines, they have a CSV activity, which is very interesting. In the Philippines, in some of the far-off areas outside of Manila, usually when people buy this drink, they do not get it from 7-Eleven or vending machines, but rather they go to the mom-and-pop stores. And there is this sari-sari. They call them sari-sari. So it's run by a small family, the sari-saris. And there is a star project. Basically, it's about empowerment of females so that these moms at the sari-saris can take care of the children and at the same time operate a small store, sari-sari, to sell drinks, a bit of snack, etc. And Coca-Cola would give them some training and also to use their social capital to look for different partners so as to grant some loans to these females to buy some essential equipment, etc., before they start their sari-sari. And also, Coca-Cola would provide some training so that they can operate these little shops well. Obviously, for these women, they become a micro-entrepreneur. And Coca-Cola would have the advantage of distribution because it'll be easier for them to distribute to far-flung areas through this network. And therefore, we emphasize that the heart is very important, and we approach it from a rational point of view to encourage those who are very bottom-line conscious. And definitely the bottom line is positive, as in this project. Now, I don't understand why people serve as volunteers. That has no bottom line. And even you, let's not talk about the basic law. What about you as agency for volunteer service? Volunteers as social, the S in the ESG, how can you convince people and corporations to become volunteers? Let me give you a bit of history. The Agency for Volunteer Service was set up in 1970, over 50 years ago, showing that volunteers, starting from the 1970s, we can see that for Hong Kong people serving as volunteers, there is more and more participation, and that many of the corporates have set up volunteer teams. Well, for instance, Towngas. You're not telling your employees you have to become volunteers. You don't say that because, as we said, it has to come from the heart. But sometimes the corporations will have to give it a push. And after that, it becomes automatic. It snowballs. Friends having joined the volunteer service, after that, they feel some sense of satisfaction. Some of them get other benefits, such as more friends, wider friend circle. Some learn new skill sets. Some feel, I'm able to help someone in need. And if the person smiles at him, thanks him, then inside he feels warm and rich. So you ask why people serve as volunteers. Well, a few years ago, we did a survey. There are many, many reasons, and I'll share those with you if we have the time another day. Now, if you have colleagues in your corporate serving as volunteer, you will get a feedback when you talk to him. But at the same time, there are those who have not served as volunteers, and you wonder why they don't. Well, some say, I don't have the time. And every week, for example, I only have 1 hour to serve as a volunteer. Where do I find a volunteer service that wants me? Well, this is where the corporate comes in. The corporate should organize services or work with other NGOs. And when you have a project, then all around you, there are actually a lot of people who want to participate. Not everyone is a planner. Not everyone is a leader. But for those who want to be participants, there are many of them. In a simple survey, how many of you are interested to serve as a volunteer? Raise your hand. Wow. So happy to see this. If our CE sees this, the potential is limitless. No one did not raise a hand just now. Thank you, thank you. So you can see, it is not just about the Agency for Volunteer Service. A lot of organizations and people in Hong Kong are promoting volunteerism. If you find the volunteer service is meaningful, spread it around. Tell other people. And perhaps you feel you're a beneficiary from volunteering. Maybe there are some intangibles. You have a value output or maybe an economic output, and you resolve certain social issues. On the other hand, you may have the feeling that you have some positivity to spread. A lot of people feel that this is very important. I don't know how to measure it, but it cannot be bought by money. And maybe it's worth a lot of money. Hard to measure. Now, for volunteers, there are many, many ways to measure volunteer service because there's definitely an economic value, but how you measure it differs. From an economic point of view, for instance, let's say lawyers are easy because we charge hourly rates. Now, this morning, I asked my CE, now I've done however many hours of service, And he just told me, well, last year there was 30,000 hours you've given me. Well, and I calculated that's $150 million, and that's not bad. That's the economic output in terms of my service, and that's not bad. And if everybody does something, it would change the world. So we do hope that you will volunteer with us. Now, this has to do with S. How the corporates go about S is important. Apart from support from the management, you have to mobilize the colleagues. Do they want to, on a Saturday and Sunday, refrain from horse racing, refrain from gathering with the family, join you and do volunteer service? And there's another issue, like quantifying the contribution. $5,000 per hour, I worked out, that's how you charge. And how do you actually calculate this for other people? I mean, this is a vexing question. Now, I say, you do so much volunteer work, you spray, pesticides, and you spray alcohol during COVID for other people, etc., all that good work. And you give out lunch boxes to the needy families, and after that you build a platform, website, so that they can link in, and mid-autumn you organize competitions and you give little gifts to them, making them happy. I know how much you have spent, and I know how many hours you have spent as well, but how much happier are they? How many people would develop, let's say, depression, and they did not because of what you did? Hard to say. And maybe some of the people would go berserk if they're locked in their home all the time. But how to measure the good? Well, I've gone on the internet to look it up. Well, I had communication with Elaine before. It seems very complicated. So another question for you. How do we measure the S, the good that have come from our S? Different organizations will have different means and different missions. And for the listed companies, there's something difficult for us, and that is that different rating agencies would have different criteria in rating us. Let's say, for instance, this year I've spent $3 million, and I tell Mr. Wong, and we have 500 beneficiaries, we have 300 volunteer hours, and if the question is, how have you helped them? How much happier are they? How can we measure? Dr. Wong, you've done a lot of research. Stephen, what do you say? Well, this is exactly about social impact measurement. That's very good. We have been scratching our head for over 10 years. Let me tell you about how we scratch our heads. Now, first of all, on mental health. This panel, I just realized, the topic is creating shared value to sustain Hong Kong's competitiveness. Yes, right. It's about Hong Kong's competitiveness. Yes, indeed, it's related. And I'll just give you an example. Just now you talked about mental health. Now, C.C. Lam is here, and being a medical doctor, we've actually done the mental health research recently. Mental health, what does it mean? From my background in investment banking, at the time, investment banking management was simple and easy. It is greed and fear. That is to say, if employees are not doing well, you fire them. That's fear. And if they do well, give them a huge bonus. So greed and fear. And you've lived in that kind of a culture, logically, the mental well-being would not be good. Right? Yes, agree. Now, conversely, if we argue that in the modern day and age, you can no longer use this management tool to threaten or lure or incentivize the people. You have to engage them. You have to make them feel that the work is meaningful. Only then will you be able to increase productivity. And I'm coming to S now. Employees' mental well-being is very important. It directly has to do with productivity of the company, right? It has direct bearing on the competitiveness of Hong Kong, directly related. All right? So I'll answer your question.
So the next question, we talk about social impact and its assessment. So in terms of the methodologies adopted, there are various ways, but it all boils down to about some scientific method. For instance, if you are able to measure about an intervention and what benefits it has brought, or for instance, there are some control groups or some different examples. And for instance, if you are conducting a random sampling with a control group, actually that's not enough. In Hong Kong, it seems that in social science and to carry out such application, we do have such application, but can we do more? If we do not have this much, and perhaps we need to consult the US and the UK studies, etc., and to really help us to have more insight. And this is, for instance, a tool that we can use to help us to manage. And I think that in social science researchers, we need to invest a lot of resources so that it can help companies, and rather than companies thinking about the effect of the intervention. Otherwise, the companies will run into a lot of problems. Okay, before talking to Francis, and we also would like to touch upon another topic. You know, in mainland China, and we have a hotline. In Hong Kong, we also have a hotline which is for mental health. And if you're having a tough day, you can call this mental health hotline, and if you are feeling great, and the company will also do well. So perhaps I'll say a few words first, and Elsie can add more from a more professional perspective. Let's not forget that in terms of the measurement, what is this for? Is this for an international ranking, or is it for everyone in Hong Kong is living happily? And this is more important. So if we look at this from different perspectives, we will see different ideas. And if we are blindly chasing, I think that sometimes we will be chasing the wrong project. For instance, we have some method, and for instance, over 100 families, and perhaps they can put their houses together and can share. And I I'm deeply moved by one person. You know, she says that he's made some money and he wants to help his neighbors. And if an owner and he has spent 8 million on his apartment, and he takes it out for us to run our social enterprises, and who is a better person here? I think both of them are very good. I don't think that we need to worry about this. Social capital is hard to measure. Let's not measure for the sake of measuring it. There is a lot of areas whereby we can develop. And in addition, we have a lot of projects in Kwai Chung. And as I have said earlier, for instance, we have similar work that can be done in Hong Kong. In addition, we also have some common shared factories for women who are staying at home, and they can also go to work and to have a sense of achievements. Sometimes it's not just about money. Sometimes they can come out and work here and to take their mind off. For instance, the argument they just had with their husband at home. So sometimes some of the employees or employers, they would say that it's difficult to find a long-term freelancer to help them out. So for Hong Kong MA at the moment, we are doing this kind of work. Some of the employers, they hope that in the short term, they can get these stay-at-home moms and to get used to work again. And there are many innovative ways in addition for the employees, for the employers, and when they hire people, and this will also help improve their future management. It's not really about the result, it's about the employer It's about the business. They can continue to reevaluate their responsibilities and their purpose. When we talk about, for instance, social capital management, it's not just about the commercial side, including government resources as well as charity. Charity resources in the past, sometimes we would measure it by money, how much money has come in, and later on, people started measuring, for instance, its impact, for instance, how many people have come to an event, etc. Sometimes you need to listen to them to tell you the story before you can understand. For instance, by filling out a form or by filling out a document, it's very difficult to measure. So whether it is in the business community or in other fields, and it's very difficult to think about this in a comprehensive way. We really need to find a multidimensional way to look at this in a scientific fashion. Well, time is running out, so perhaps Elise and Melissa, what are your views? And for instance, for CSV, actually, we have a lot of indicators, and what we really need to focus on would be about each company. And for CSV, if you can see the benefits, in addition, for the social impact, for instance, we have a lot of good aspects, and if you simply look at your own record, and sometimes that would be beneficial to you and be beneficial to the society. In addition, I would also like to respond. For instance, what we have just heard about the development, and there is a very simple way to do CSV, which is to look at in the whole supply chain and value chain, which part can you work with the social enterprises. Actually, there are many different NGOs or social enterprises. They would have an opportunity to play a role in your business activities. So this is simply a small recommendation. If you have any more, please feel free to get in touch with me. And thank you for all our speakers. This is the end of this session. Thank you for our speakers for all your excellent sharing. Please be seated. This morning, we have heard that actually being a volunteer is so interesting, and we are also hoping that in the future we can see more people participating. And our next speaker is Hong Kong 2050 is now senior advisor, Mr. Lam. He is continuing to push forward for the development of society. And today, Mr. Lam is here to share with us about a sustainable future together with social values. So let's welcome Mr. Lam. Good afternoon, everyone. Coming here today, I feel that I'm the dwarf between giants. Everybody is an expert. I don't really have a job right at the moment. I don't really know why I'm standing here today. I know that I have about 20 minutes, and I think that we are a bit delayed, so perhaps I'll be fast. And why do I say this? And it's because I myself, I used to work in the climate sector, and after retiring, I started working in Red Cross. And thirdly, and I'm also one of the scouts, and the scouts, we often say that be ready. So these are the three things that I'd like to talk about. So in this photo, can you see Hong Kong? You can see the building. You can see the building from Hong Kong, and you can also see the storm that's about to come. So can we change this? And can we reduce the losses caused by natural disasters and storms. I think that there are ways that we can do, and that is to say the event itself that we cannot change, but we can actually change the result. If we can withstand storms, can we actually also survive climate change? So climate change seems to be even more severe, and there doesn't seem to be a place whereby we can escape it. So if the temperature continues to rise, and we have seen that the World Meteorology Organization has just issued a report, and it says that people cannot really live in these areas. So once it reaches a certain degree, people cannot live there. So in Pakistan this year, there were some regions, and the temperature has soared above 50 Celsius degree. You can live indoors with the AC on, but outside, the plants are difficult to survive. So with the climate change, can we survive this? Actually, there will be a lot of sufferings, and they are on their way. So we talk about a sustainable future, sustainable development. There's a lot of possibility. Let's not even talk about possibilities. Is there still a sustainable future? People need to survive. People cannot die out. And in addition, for our lives to continue, we need to continue to live our lives, and in addition, can we live with dignity? This is also very important. And for instance, we can simply build a pigsty and throw people in there. It's very cheap, but people have lived. But is there dignity if people live like this? So we need to think about a sustainable future, which means that people need to live with dignity. But for the human future, do we really have an unlimited future, or there is an end to this future? For instance, if you take a look at this picture, this is a petrol car, and this car is on the cliff. It's about to fall. So in the past, we have used the past 200 years relied on fossil fuel. So now we are in a climate change crisis. We have encountered hazard and then disasters. If we have a hazard, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would lead to disaster. However, in August this year, in the United States, there were some scientists, and they published a paper. In this paper, it said that for the government, they would need to appoint a specific climate change commission and to really study about the crisis that human beings face and can we really exist. And in the past, we simply thought that virus is a small thing, but as we have seen that COVID has been a major issue and challenge to the human race. So therefore, this scientist has said that, not simply to look at these disasters, but also the secondary disasters, and when they happen, what results would this lead to? And actually, when we have an imminent hazard, and this is something that I've learned from the Red Cross, there are some disasters, and you would need to think about whether we can reduce the disaster, and for instance, can we make some preparations, and for instance, to build some buildings that can withstand storms. In addition, if the storms really come, and for instance, when the signals for typhoon are hoisted and people need to stay home, and instead of going out on the street to avoid the disasters. And in addition, we also need to go out and respond to these disasters and to rebuild our society.
好多人唔知道。
A lot of people understand that for mitigation work, or for preparation, or even for responding to the crisis, in itself it can be hurtful. I have a story, for instance, in the past for the observatory, if you ask people to move the flower pots from the balcony because there's a storm coming, well, very often these pots will fall onto the street and hurt people. And that's why we refrain from hoisting typhoon signal number 1, because if we do so, it potentially hurts people. And let's say typhoon number 8. If everybody rushes to the MTR and there's pushing, somebody gets onto the rail and that person may die. If typhoon number 8 may not kill people, on the other hand. So when we talk about responding and recovery or even reconstructing, restoring, and if in the end there is grafting, corruption, well, for the Red Cross, it did happen. We made some donations to a country, and we wanted to rebuild some of the homes for the people. But the officials in that country wanted too much in terms of graft, and we finally had to abandon the plan. It can happen. So in the next period of time, the world is going through a very strange time in face of climate change. The reason why, let's say in August, there was that paper published. Now, because of time, I can't read it out all, but you can at a glance see all this. Just a small virus. At the time, we thought it was a scientific issue because it can kill this virus. So at the time, we responded by sending people to the hospitals. We wanted to mitigate the crisis, etc. But you know what? Once the people get into the hospital, you remember in Hong Kong, a lot of people died outside of the hospital, at the door of the hospital. They died because of not the virus, but how we responded to that crisis caused by the virus. So they did not die from the virus itself. A lot of people, the poor people, for instance, they actually die of our response to crisis. For example, in Sham Shui Po, going to the squatter areas, I don't know how many people actually die from illness or from the COVID, but some people may die from hunger. In the past 3 years, things have changed a lot. So a virus, originally a scientific issue, but it has caused a number of, the words up here, social issues, economic issues, and also it shows us one thing, and that is the city, urban life is very brittle. It's very fragile. And people can starve to death, and people can die because of lack of drugs, for instance. So this is where the world is now. A lot of things is outside the ambit of science, actually. Now, of course, I have to talk about climate. Some people say, oh, crisis mitigation would be sufficient, but the World Meteorological Organization had published that paper, and we now know that there are limitations. However strong your buildings, however whatever response you put in to lower temperature rise, it is impossible to adjust anymore. It is impossible to adapt to the crisis anymore. Now, climate change is very interesting. We can actually manage and control it. If we do not burn fossil fuel and if we plant more trees, we can really help, as opposed to thunderstorms. Nothing we can do with thunderstorms, but fossil fuel, we need to resolve that, and we need to resolve that within 28 years. The human race had never done that before, to change its main fuel within 28 years. Now, scientifically, it is feasible. Solar, wind energy, and in the deserts, they should use more solar power and hydrogen, for example. But in these 28 years, for this huge change in using fuel and energy, there are a lot of problems. Now, I just want to make a side point here. Hazards of climate change. Directly, it's about extreme climate and weather. People may die from that. But on the other hand, 2050, it's already been projected that crops and food production on Earth will have fallen by 10% to 25%. CUHA had done a recent study, and that is some 20%, over 20% less of food will be produced with a growing population. Well, what do you think? If the world production of food is only 90%, do you think people will still be full? Well, what do you think? Let's say 10% of the people will not have food if the food production in the world drops 10%. Who thinks that that will be the case? 10% of the world population will go hungry. Well, I can tell you, 10% will go hungry, and that is 700 million people in the world. And we're talking about poor people food crisis. That's 700 million people. And I often say, the tsunamis killing however many thousand people, and I say that's small fry, and people criticize me for that, because starving to death is death without dignity. It is unacceptable. And also, climate change can cause illnesses, and we'll not talk about that. Now, the Red Cross is seeing clearer and clearer that the humanitarian rescue is more and more important. And around us, resources are getting less and less in this world. And there is an overburdening of the resources. And the poor countries, as well as the poor people in affluent countries, will die without dignity. Now, reconstruction. We now know that we need to build resilient communities, and that includes social capital. But the poor people, often they do not have a voice, and therefore they would be neglected. Then their impact would be direct and big. Now I have to speed up. Now everybody knows that climate change is very real, but we can change the trajectory of the hazards, and we know that by 2050 there will be net zero emissions and renewable energy transform within 28 years. But on the other hand, relevant to that is a total transformation of our economy. What to do? How can we manage that transition? No one knows the answer. Very clearly, the energy prices will be highly unstable. You see that already in the UK. It's gone up 3 times. How can people live in that kind of environment? And the young people, or rather the poor people, the poor countries, there is a shortfall of energy. That is to say, the poor people don't even get energy. They don't have it, and that is fatal. Especially for city dwellers. They need energy, apart from water, etc. Without energy, people die. And also because the economy is transforming. Everybody's talking about starting businesses, being entrepreneurs. What about those who are not entrepreneurs? A lot of people will lose their jobs. They go unemployed. What then? So in this transition period, we have to safeguard the least energy need, the minimum energy requirements of the people, of the poor people, that is. Hey, we have a lawyer here. I think the society, the government, has a responsibility. In the Declaration of Human Rights, there is this term. It is really the government's responsibility, but society needs to bear some responsibilities as well. Towngas is very responsible. And I say here, electricity should be free for a certain amount. Do you know that you can have 0 water charges? Those who have had 0 water charges, raise your hand. Why? You were not home? Well, I've had once. Other times I pay about $10 for water tariffs, because water is a necessity. Electricity and other energies, I think that should be made free of charge for at least a certain quantity. Hong Kong in particular, and other cities, if we don't have that measure, it will be disastrous. And the value that we give to the poor people is their ability to stay alive. Now, let's talk about just transition. A lot of people around the world are talking about just transition. You have to make sure that I have a job. Some of the poor countries are saying now the affluent countries are burning all that. They're using up the fuel and they have all these emissions. Now, just the past few days, look at COP27 in Egypt. They've been talking a lot about that. So we're really talking about just transition. And there is urgent social actions needed. Now, energy has completely changed the scene. But for the poor strata of society, we have to ensure that they have employment and livelihood during economic transition. Well, we can create jobs, right? How do we create jobs? We really have to think about that because very often we can't think of ways to create jobs. But I think that shouldn't be the case. For example, during COVID, the poor people really suffered. But security guards, that's needed. But in the end, the property management companies couldn't sustain. So to provide social value, the jobs that provide social value should be protected. And also the safety should be protected. Xi Jinping, in his recent speeches, always talk about safety. Because we see that in the next 30 years, it's an unsafe world. And the poor people will face another problem, food cost rising. In the next 20 to 30 years, food prices will be hugely rising, crazily unstable. Now, I lived in Hong Kong. There was a tiny shop there, and they decided that they will give out rice boxes. And once they started doing that, people donate to it. And now every day they get donations and they continue to give out lunch boxes. And the shop gets sustained. It's continued to be operational. As we always say, if you're good heart, you're sustainable. And the small shop, therefore, survived the crisis. Now, when we talk about the earth, it's the same principle. We provide the needy with the ability to mitigate the crisis. For those who are working in the streets, in the construction sites, if you go to Shamshui Po, all these street stalls, for instance, how are they to survive this kind of weather change and this kind of volatility in the economy? Now, this is what I want to talk about, and I only know about this green economy. We have to have a way to implement this. What is the way? It's like Dao De Jing, the way is a way is a way. But in every industry, in every sector, there is their own way. And then there is the energy policy. The government determines that. For the energy companies, for example, Towngas, do you think you can prompt or nudge the government? And then the community, including the business sector, will also have to do something apart from the government, of course. Now, for myself, the future will bring a lot of sufferings to the people at large. We need a caring society. The future will require government work. It will require business work as well. But the community will have to help the needy to go through this huge transition. I have a few seconds left. Oh, I've already exceeded my time. The topic given me was about social value. What is social value? If we can allow the poor people not to die and to live with dignity, that is value. Let's leave KPI aside. I don't know what KPI is. I know I. We're talking about lives, and that is absolute. All right. Lastly, if I can just talk about social value, I do hope that today, now you have a good livelihood, but outside there is a big group of people who are really hurt. The people that I meet in the bottom stratum of society in the past few months, they have really, really suffered. And I'm talking about the next few decades. It will be really difficult for them. So what you're doing now is also helping people to face up to the challenges in the next 30 years.
Thank you, Mr. Lam, for your sharing. Please be seated.